Mark, are you chairing?
Yeah.
So to Anthony, whoever's the host, Daniel is going to have the slide presentation. So have you enabled sharing?
I have just enabled it. Also, can someone send me a copy of the presentation? I haven't received anything.
Yep, I can do that. And actually, Jeff, just because of the logistics I have here, it might be easier if Anthony or someone in the clerk's office can be DJ for me on the slides themselves. I don't know if that'll present an issue. I can certainly share my screen, but
if you can send them to me, this is Naomi. I can run the show for you. Just tell me when to advance the slide.
Sure, I'll send it right now. Thank you.
I think Nancy Glowa and maybe Megan Bayer will need to be admitted. I see them in the attendees.
Mr. McGovern, the time of the meeting has arrived and you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Quorum of Ordinance Committee being present, I call this meeting of May 12th, 2021 to order. The call of the meeting is to conduct a hearing on the cannabis deliveries amendments and municipal code amendments. The governor's executive order issued on March 12th, 2020 has authorized the use of remote participation in meetings of the city's public bodies in response to the threat posed to the public by the COVID-19 virus and issued guidelines for the city's use of remote participation. In addition to having the council participate remotely, we have also set up Zoom teleconference for public comment. Please be aware that Zoom is primarily being used for public comment. In order to watch the meeting, please tune into channel 22 or visit the open meeting portal on the city's website. If you would like to provide public comment, please visit the city council section of the city's webpage. Instructions for how to sign up to speak are posted there. Once you have completed the sign-up procedure, you will receive a link to the Zoom meeting. We will not allow any additional public comment sign-up after 6 p.m. All votes will be taken by roll call. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilor Carlo.
Present and audible.
Present. Vice Mayor Mellon.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor Nolan.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor Simmons. Councilor Simmons. Absent. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor Toomey. Councilor Toomey is absent. He contacted the office earlier and stated he could not attend this meeting. Councilor Zondervan.
Present and audible.
Present. Mayor Siddiqui.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor McGovern.
Present and audible.
There are 7 members present.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. So as I briefly stated in the opening, there are really two things in front of us today. There's a zoning amendment and then a municipal ordinance. Mr. Roberts, I'm sorry, I think you said that Daniel is going to be, we're being joined now by Councilor Simmons as well. You're going to do the CDD do the presentation. Do you have this broken out into, I was sort of thinking maybe we could maybe do the zoning separately, or is it all sort of combined into one presentation?
Well, Mr. Chair, this is Jeff Roberts, Director of Zoning and Development. I'll sort of I'll kind of sub in as the ringleader for community development as Iram is out, but I'll just start by introducing Dale Mesplay, who's the Senior Manager of Zoning and Development. He's going to run through a few slides. To answer your question, we added just a brief slide as part of this presentation on the cannabis business permitting ordinance, but as we get into that discussion, we also have Nancy Gloa, the city solicitor, in attendance, and she and her staff can speak more to any specific questions about the cannabis business permitting ordinance.
Okay. So I think, we'll follow the typical ordinance agenda. We'll hear the presentation. We'll go to clarifying questions. I don't see anyone signed up for public comment now, but maybe they will come in before 6. I'm sorry?
Councilman, there's one person in public comment.
Okay. And then we'll go there and then come back for further discussion and kind of see how it goes in terms of, I'd like to try for counselors, if we can try to keep, maybe when we get into this, let's, maybe try to deal with some zoning conversation first and move on to the municipal ordinance, just so we're not flip-flopping back and forth and getting confused, but we can play it by ear and see how it goes. All right, so with that, CDD, take it away.
I'll just turn it right over to Daniel.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Chair McGovern. I'm Daniel Mesplay, Zoning Manager for Zoning and Development. I'm going to just spend a few minutes going through the nuts and bolts of the zoning petition, so let's jump right into it. Slide, please. So let's just take a moment to recap how we got to this point. Cambridge has spent the last few years building an internal zoning and permitting infrastructure for adult recreational cannabis uses. And at the time, it was anticipated that home delivery of cannabis products would be a future consideration, but at that time, it was also not permitted by the Cannabis Control Commission. So fast forward to late last year, and the CCC adopted amendments to its regulations, which would enable home delivery of adult use cannabis products. The City Council desired to initiate a zoning petition that would be consistent with the state regulations and also be fairly permissive in where and how these uses would be regulated, and directed CDD staff to prepare new zoning language in concert with the law department. So that's kind of how we got here, and here's a little timeline of that. Next slide, please. All right, let's discuss the meat and bones of the zoning petition. So from a 30,000 foot level, this zoning petition follows the terms used at the Cannabis Control Commission's language in reference to permitted home delivery uses. So there are two new land use classifications here. One is the cannabis delivery operator establishment, and the other is the cannabis courier establishment. So the cannabis delivery operator establishment is almost like a warehouse or distribution center. It can purchase wholesale products, it can store and repackage and relabel products on site and deliver directly to consumers, but it cannot operate a store on site. For the cannabis courier establishment, it's almost like a dispatch office for home delivery. So the physical point of sale is at an existing adult use retailer, and the cannabis courier facilitates the delivery from that point of sale to consumers. So it cannot sell directly. It must also have state regulated delivery vehicles, which need to be parked on site outside of business hours. And the state regulates that delivery is limited between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. Next slide, please. In terms of where these uses would be permitted, we've proposed that the cannabis courier establishments be permitted by right in all office, business, and industrial districts. For the delivery operating establishments, these would be permitted only by planning board special permit in all office, business, and industrial districts. So this would be the same as cannabis retail store would also be allowed in office districts. And the reason why we are proposing it this way is that it gives the council the broadest range of consideration, and they can scale it back as they see fit, rather than starting with a smaller set of districts and needing to refile again if they wish to expand it. Next slide, please. So we currently have buffer requirements for adult use stores. In this zoning petition, we do not recommend including buffer requirements for cannabis courier establishments because there is no product actually being stored on site. For cannabis delivery operator establishments, because there is product storage, repackaging, and relabeling on site, we've proposed similar buffer requirements as we do for adult use retailers. So that's 300 from schools, parks, and recreational areas. Next slide, please. At the core of these delivery uses are question parking, traffic, and transportation logistics. So we've included some baseline requirements that these uses would need to submit a logistics plan that is subject to review and approval by traffic, parking, and transportation and the police department. And just a note that this is already required for existing adult recreational uses. Part of the strategy for including a logistics plan is to have a clearer regulatory process that doesn't require as much direct involvement from the planning board. This is intended to codify in the zoning the standard types of conditions that are typically included in planning board special permits. And just as a note, so I noted here low minimum parking requirements, and what we mean by that is that minimum parking would be waived for establishments up to 4,800 gross square feet or up to 8,000 square feet in higher density districts, which are close to transit, which tracks with what we have as the lowest minimum parking requirements in the zoning ordinance. Next slide, please. We've touched on this briefly already, but just to note how these proposed uses would be reviewed. The cannabis courier is as of right, but would still need to comply with the requirements of section 11.800 of the zoning ordinance, which regulates cannabis uses. For the delivery operator establishment, a planning board special permit would be required, and criteria for approval are the same as cannabis retail uses and the general special permit criteria in section 10.43. I should also point out that the size of the uses for the cannabis delivery operator establishment is limited to 10,000 square feet, which is something that was included in amendments at the state level. Next slide, please. So that we just talked about kind of the nuts and bolts of the zoning. Chair McGovern did mention that there are some changes proposed for the cannabis business permitting ordinance. These are relatively minor in nature and generally consist of adding the same state definitions to this area of the code and adding a requirement about the submittal of a logistics plan, and also adding a provision that renewal of the business permit is contingent upon no outstanding violations of the zoning ordinance or traffic and parking regulations. Next slide, please. So just some things to think about in terms of these proposed changes. This ordinance is designed to be fairly permissive. For both of these types of establishments, product cannot be sold on site. So the uses themselves will function more like warehouse dispatch offices. And something to consider is whether that could create voids of street level activity in some of the retail and mixed use areas we're proposed to be permitted. Another thing to think about is whether these new cannabis delivery operators, which is kind of like the warehouse type of use, would compete with existing approved retailers since they are able to deliver directly to consumers. And lastly, the cannabis courier establishments essentially will function as a middleman between an existing adult retailer and the home consumer. We hear a lot about the third-party delivery services for restaurants and other uses, which can add costs or cut into revenues for businesses. And we do wonder if something similar could occur with cannabis courier establishments and existing approved retailers or not. Next slide, please. So here's kind of a summary table of all the things that we flew through, and this is also included as part of the cover memo to the council as part of the origination of the petition. So with that, I believe that's our last slide. I'll stop there and turn it to Jeff if there's anything further. Otherwise, we'd be happy to answer any questions the council may have or the ordinance committee may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. I'll just add as a final point. I know normally we joke about pulling me back from vacation to do these presentations, but we've pulled Daniel back from vacation to do this presentation. So, so we all appreciate him doing that. I think that does it. But we can answer any questions between the two of us related to this. And as I said, I think Nancy Gloa and also Megan Bayer from the law department are present to answer any questions, legal questions related to the zoning or about the cannabis business permitting ordinance.
Terrific. Thank you. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, you to the staff. Thanks for putting this together. It's good to see this moving forward in Cambridge. I think having it in the districts that were outlined and not making it more restrictive would be my preference. The one question I had was, what is the thought behind the buffer zones for cannabis delivery operators? I sort of get the thought on buffer zones for retail establishments that'll be selling cannabis in person if we're worried folks will go to a nearby park or something. And I know there's different schools of thought on that, but for delivery operators, if it's not being sold on site, I guess I'm a little more confused about the buffer zone. I'm just wondering if there was some more thought behind that could be explained.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Chair. Is this the appropriate time to answer questions individually, or
yes.
Should we? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Jeff or Megan want to add some color to this. I believe the idea was pretty simplistic. It was to be consistent with the buffers that we have in place already for cannabis production facilities and adult use retailers. Basically, with the idea that if the and just to clarify, for delivery operator establishments, there is a point of sale that's occurring at the establishment, but there just can be no customer on site. But I believe that the buffers were included for the delivery operator just to be consistent with what we have for production facilities and adult use retailers.
And I guess just to follow up on that, the thought is, I guess I get the consistency part, but in terms of this, is there a reason for it? Is there a thought that the smell would waft? I'm really just trying to, apologies if these are simple questions, I'm really just trying to understand what the rationale is.
Well, and this is Jeff. I can add something to what Daniel just said, which is that the provisions about buffer zones are sort of patterned after state regulations, which have a standard separation of 500 feet from these types of facilities, and it was, we were drawing from the council's previous discussion around cannabis uses, and whether or not was interested in adopting a reduced buffer distance, which the state regulations allow cities to do, and the 300 feet was ultimately what the council arrived at there. So there's there could be any number of issues that come up. I mean, we've now seen a number of cannabis establishments, retail establishments permitted in the city. The planning board hears a lot of different questions and a lot of particular concerns. I think some of those concerns are maybe unique to the real stores that have a storefront presence and have customers, but some of those concerns might also be relevant if it's just an establishment that has delivery vehicles coming in and out of it, and staff and yes, so the odors are certainly one of the things that sometimes people bring up as an issue.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I think just the one other thought I had was that we know it's challenging for these places to open in Cambridge as it is for any retail, and I've heard that. And if we're not a very large geographical city, and the buffer zones end up taking away a lot of potential locations. So if that's something to consider, maybe we could tweak that a bit or move it, I would be open to considering that. But that's all I had for now, and we'll yield back.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councilor Nolan in a second, but I had a follow up on the buffer question. So just to kind of keep it together. I think that when we talk about buffer zones, there are different types, right? There's the type that Mr. Rudd was talking about in terms of how many feet from a school or from a park or that kind of thing. And then there's the buffer zone of how close these establishments can own one another, right? And we did eliminate the buffer zone when it came to economic empowerment applicants, right? So an economic empowerment applicant can open next to a medical dispensary, for example, where a medical dispensary cannot open right next to another medical dispensary if it's not economic empowerment. So the buffer zones you're suggesting, are they in line? Do they make an exception for economic empowerment applicants as we did with the retail, or is it no? It doesn't matter, or is it no business can open within a radius?
Thank you for the question, Chair McGovern, and through you, and Jeff may want to supplement this, but I believe that there is no carve out from, well, first I should say that I don't believe that there are any buffer requirements for these types of uses from one another. And as a result, there wouldn't be any sort of special carve out for economic empowerment applicants because there just is no buffer requirement between these uses.
So it could be that you could have two of these next to each other, and that's fine. Okay. Councilor Nolan.
Thank you, Chair McGovern, and I appreciate all the work on this. I'm very excited that we're moving it forward. I also, one of my questions that I wrote down was what Councilor Sabrina Rula and Chair McGovern said, is that my understanding is these delivery, they repackage, so there shouldn't be any kind of question of smell or even processing. And the reason for the buffer zone around the others is because of customers waiting in line. I would be in favor of just having no buffer zone, or even, if it's 100 feet, but it just seems like this is really a delivery operation. So I would also support some change in that. I know the minimum parking has come up, and this may be one of those questions that is ridiculous, but can bikes be used instead, or is that forbidden by law? And if so, then can we not have minimum parking, or is that required?
Question. Mr. Mesplay or Mr. Roberts, who wants it?
Thank you, Mr. I can take this one. It gets a little outside of this particular proposal. So bicycle parking is a separate requirement in zoning. There's minimum requirements for bicycle parking. We kind of separated those from auto parking. Auto parking is different. In terms of the approach to the requirements, it's a little strange. What we're trying to do with parking is align it with other similar types of uses, and some of this carries through to the discussion we're having in a different kind of zoning petition about the regional small business zoning, in which the proposal there is to broaden the exemption for small businesses, so that if the council were to adopt that zoning, it would mean that for a non-residential use, including one of these uses, any new use that's established in an existing building wouldn't be required to add any new parking. So there's a lot of flexibility already built into the zoning on being able to waive the parking requirement. It would only be a situation if somebody were building a new facility, and if it were a large enough facility to start to trigger the requirement for 5 or more parking spaces, which would have to be pretty big. In those cases, there would be some requirement of having some off-street parking. But in most of the cases that we would expect to see, we wouldn't have an auto parking requirement.
Okay, so I guess I saw in it low parking requirement similar to light industrial, but what you're saying is there may be a situation where there's no requirement, or if Mark and Patty decided to do Mark and Patty's bicycle only delivery for cannabis, we wouldn't have to have any parking. We would just be able to use our bikes and not have to have a parking spot for a car.
So yes, you can provide. So in fact, in any of the retail cannabis stores that we've seen come to the planning board, they include bicycle parking for employees, but they don't include they don't include auto parking. The one thing I would note is that they're in terms of, I think you mentioned bicycle delivery. I don't believe that's allowed under state law. The delivery has to be in a like a van, a vehicle that can be secured.
Okay, that's what I was wondering about. Thank you.
Hey, Solicitor Glowa was going to comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to note that under the state cannabis control regulations, bicycle delivery is not permitted. So that is not something that's allowed. I also wanted to just note, as far as the buffer is concerned, that since this was advertised 300-foot buffer from schools and parks, I think it could be argued that it might alter the fundamental character of this petition to reduce a buffer altogether, where an abutter, for example, to a particular district where this is allowed or was going to be put into place, might argue that if they had known there'd be no buffer, they might have come and participated and objected. And so under the normal analysis of what would trigger re-advertisement, that could.
She froze.
Oh, I wasn't sure if it was done or.
I think we got the gist of it, though.
Yeah. Thank you. I wouldn't. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I wouldn't want to stop us and have to re-advertise, but I would want us to consider, if we could, lowering that buffer zone, because it doesn't seem to make sense given that there's no there's not even repackaging. It's just basically a delivery operation. But I'm really happy to be here, and if we can't lower it without re-advertising, if we move it forward, I would vote for that and then consider later on amending it if that makes sense. Thank you, Chairman Govern.
Mr. Roberts, you had your hand up on this.
Yeah, I wanted to make one point, and I can turn it back over to Nancy to finish. But I just wanted to point out that under this zoning, as with the current zoning for retailers, the planning board can approve a reduction or waiver of that buffer by special permit. So they're already coming to the planning board for a special permit anyway. So the buffer is really it is something that can be adjusted.
Thank you. All right, Councilor Carlone, next.
Thank you, Chair McGovern. So this allowed in a retail district and therefore in a storefront. What is this? What can the storefront be? A window of people sitting on their chairs? If you can't see the product in a retail store, tell me what we expect that these storefronts look like and what we're hoping they'll look like, because I'm thinking of adjacent retail businesses. What are you expecting? What are we expecting?
Thank you, Chair Carlone, for the question. If these were standalone businesses, the cannabis courier establishments would function essentially like a dispatch office, because no product can actually be stored on site. And the principal purpose of the types of the cannabis courier use would be to facilitate delivery from an existing approved retailer to a home consumer. So it doesn't actually occur from a standalone courier establishment. One thing to potentially point out, however, is that these cannabis courier establishments are able to co-locate with an existing approved retailer. So having the retail districts allow these types of uses would also open up the possibility that they could co-locate within an existing approved retail operation.
Well, that makes sense to me, but realistically, I don't see how a delivery company can afford storefront space unless it's in one of the poorest neighborhoods. And what is it then? It's dead space. It's people waiting to be called out. I think there's an issue there that we have to talk about. I'm not being critical. I get why you're doing what you're doing. I'm just thinking, how does it support neighboring retail use? It sounds like it's an empty space that people are playing cards. I'm joking, but my point is, the storefront is a storefront. It's a window onto the inside. And we don't want to just blank it off because that looks like it's vacant. I think it's an issue there that we'll have to talk about. Thanks.
And to the chair, sorry, this is Jeff Roberts again. I just wanted to just add one note that I think really what distinguishes these types of businesses is that they have to have parking for their delivery vehicles, as Daniel noted in the presentation. So it's not necessarily going to be the most conducive sort of for a typical Cambridge storefront that might just have frontage without much or any parking. These are likely going to be looking for places where there's parking on site, and they may, that's going to be probably more of a priority than the storefront area.
Councilor Carlo?
Then I would say that if it's co-located, maybe that makes sense. But if not, it shouldn't be in retail districts. Maybe some isolated retail districts, if you can convince me there's ample parking, but it seems overly broad. And we all know where taxi locations were. They're almost all gone now. They're on the periphery in a warehouse district, primarily, for the same reason. So I could see co-locating, that makes sense, but anything else does not make land use sense to me.
Okay. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to address the comments about the retail districts. I agree with my colleague that it wouldn't make sense for these businesses to take up retail frontage, but I do think we want to allow them in a retail district because there are situations like even in Central Square where there may be space in the back that has parking and that could accommodate this type of business. And then the front can be more traditional retail. And perhaps that's what we imagine when we co-locate, but it could be separate businesses. It could be a restaurant in the front and a delivery business in the back. So I think we want to regulate that maybe through the criteria, but I don't think we want to exclude these businesses from retail districts because, again, the challenge is really finding locations where they can even operate. And then I did want to respond, and maybe it's a follow-on question to Ms. Gloa, because what I think I heard was that if we removed the buffer zone altogether, then it would be a problem. But if we reduced it, if we said instead of 300 feet, it's 100 feet, would that still trigger the same objection?
Councilor Gloa.
Thank you. Sorry, I had technical problems for a moment. Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that the analysis would be the same. I mean, the conservative view of that is that if changing the buffer district might change how anybody out there would perceive it, then that would normally be considered altering the fundamental character. So where a buffer zone between this and other uses could be a significant factor to people looking at this, then I think it wouldn't really matter whether it's reducing it from 300 to 100 or reducing it all to nothing in terms of there leaving a risk of that. I mean, I'm happy to consider that and look into that a little bit more, but that is what I think that's probably the.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, because I believe we did something similar with the original retail zoning where we reduced the buffer zones. So I think it would be helpful to get a more complete analysis.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't recall that, but I'm happy to look into that further and report back to the council.
Yeah, I think, Councilor Carlin, I'll go to you. So I think maybe what Councilor Zondervan's talking about is that in the original, it was a 100-foot zone, and then through the course of our discussions, we amended it to 300 feet, and we didn't re-advertise. I mean, I'll be honest, I always get what's significant to one person could be significant to somebody else, and we change things and amend things all the time. So I never quite understand where this line is, to be really honest with you. Anyway, Councilor Carlin.
I just wanted to comment on the earlier comment by Councilor Zondervan. I agree criteria can deal with the back of an active storefront. Totally agree, and that's where I was going. So even though we moved on to another subject, I wanted you to know that. Thank you.
Great. Excuse me. So we're still on sort of clarifying questions before we go to public comment. Is there any council? I don't see any other hands up. So with that, why don't we just move? Oh, Councilor Zondervan's hands up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to check, are we also going to discuss the cannabis business permit ordinance?
Yes. I mean, do you have questions on that as well?
Well, we didn't get a presentation on that. I guess I'm asking, are we going to get a presentation on that first and then go to public comment, or the other
On the municipal ordinance? I think it was just that one. I think it was just that one slide with some very sort of minor amendments. But if you want to ask for more clarification, feel free to do that.
Okay, I have some amendments that I want to propose, but I think I can wait until after public comment.
Okay, yeah, I think we still only person. So, Mr. Clerk, will you go to public comment, please?
So we have one public commenter signed up. I don't see the Zoom, Marcus Johnson Smith. So I do not believe that one person is here.
Okay. So Marquis Gaffey is in the attendees, but not signed up for public comment?
Not signed up, no.
Okay. All right. So with that, it is now 6:05 on a motion by Councilor Nolan to close public comment. Roll call.
On that motion, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yeah.
Yes. Councilor Toomey. Absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Motion passes 8 in favor, 1 absent.
Okay. So we're now back to general conversation and questions. Pleasure of the committee. Councilor Nolan. And then Councilor Zondervan. Councilor Nolan.
Thank you. I'm sure this is just a basic one, but reminding myself when I went back to look at the memo that this will give a 3-year window for social equity or economic empowerment applicants. Is that from the date that the CCC initially did it or the date that we ordain it? And I'm not sure that matters too much, but I would appreciate understanding that timeline starts, because I'm sorry if I missed it, it wasn't totally clear to me in the wording of the memo. I'm happy to see it. I think we all are in favor of it. It's very good.
Yeah. Solicitor Glowa, maybe? Do you know when the timeline for that begins?
I'm going to ask Megan to respond to that.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Clerk, the 3-year period isn't in our ordinance. It isn't in the cannabis delivery zoning or business permit. It's in the Cannabis Control Commission's regulations. So they've said that for all delivery licenses, both the courier and the operator delivery license, there is a 36-month preference period for economic empowerment applicants and social equity applicants. And that 36 months will start from the date that they first issue. I don't even think it's the license. I think it's the final step where they first issue a notice that the delivery operator can commence operations. So I don't think they've done that yet for anyone. I don't think they have issued that for any delivery operator, but once they do, that starts the 36 months in which only social equity and economic empowerment applicants can get a delivery license.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Nolan? Any
So that
follow-up?
explains the memo, that reference, and it's not in our regulations, but whenever they deliver the first one in Cambridge or in the state, or
through you, Mr. Chair, in the state. So starting from whenever the Cannabis Control Commission has issued one to anyone, anywhere in the state, that starts the preference period.
You all set, Councilor Nolan? Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to start by following up on that previous question. Do we feel that we cannot or should not provide our own exclusivity period as we did for retail?
There?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we did not include the delivery license as a business under the business permit ordinance that would be subject to our 2-year preference period, because our 2-year preference period is limited to economic empowerment applicants, and the state's 36-month preference period is social equity and economic empowerment applicants. So we did not want to be in conflict with that and prevent a social equity applicant from moving forward with a delivery business within Cambridge. So our 2-year exclusivity period only pertains to the retail license, not the delivery license.
Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm aware of that distinction. What I'm asking is, should we consider a separate exclusivity period for the delivery businesses in our own permitting ordinance? Or do we feel that the state's 36-month exclusivity period either precludes that or is sufficient so that we don't need to set our own?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so that's in part a policy determination. And then we would have to do some research to look into whether we think it would be in conflict and therefore not permissible, given that the CCC's regs provide for their own exclusivity period. You know, they previously had the legislation called on those carrying out the law, the state and municipalities, to prioritize certain applicants, but there was no exclusivity period in the cannabis controls regulations. And so that's why we determined that we had the authority to have our own exclusivity period. Now that they have one in place, we would have to do some look into, some analysis of whether that takes up the whole field on that and prevents us from doing one. But it's also a policy determination about whether you want to go beyond what the state is doing if you have authority to do that.
Councilor Zondervan?
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. So that does answer my question there. I would like us to look into that further to see if we could and should impose our own exclusivity period. And then I also wanted to ask in the definition section, and this was actually suggested to me by former state Cannabis Control Commissioner Shailene Title, that in the cannabis business definition, we should add a generic phrase that that says, or any other entity licensed by the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission to produce, transport marijuana in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, so that we can anticipate other types of businesses in the future and not necessarily have this section of the ordinance.
Are you throwing up that out there for discussion, or is that a question for? Is there a legal question or a zoning question, or who are you directing it to?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm specifically asking the law department for their, I guess, reaction to that suggestion.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Nancy may want to jump in as well. I think likely that amendment would address the issue that you would want it to, of making the cannabis business permitting ordinance apply to any future types of cannabis businesses that the Cannabis Control Commission may develop in the future. Right now, since we had listed out specifically the types of businesses that are licensed by the state and that are allowed in our zoning, that's why we are here on this amendment, because we needed to add the delivery, because that wasn't anticipated when this ordinance was originally enacted. And so I think some type of language that is sort of broadly encompasses any future type of cannabis business that might be licensed by the state might solve that problem of having to come back for future amendments. We would just have to look throughout the ordinance to see if there are any other types of changes that would need to be made to address that type of scenario well.
Chloe, is that you good with that?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, I don't know, I guess I'm a little bit muddled on the process, because I think the zoning versus the ordinance are on separate tracks. So I think what I would like to do is meet with the law department about the cannabis business permitting ordinance, because I have some other questions and potential amendments, but I'm not quite ready to toss them out there. So, but I don't know, are we anticipating a future ordinance committee meeting on that ordinance or not?
Well, I mean, that's kind of what we have to figure out, right? Zoning ordinance has a deadline, which, Mr. Clerk, what is the expiration?
It's the end of July. Give me 1 second, I'll get the date.
So just while he's doing that, so the zoning ordinance is going to have an expiration date, which I would like to not have to refile this another time. Municipal ordinance does not. It can go on forever. So, hopefully not. But, in order to get this, we could pass the zoning, but my guess is businesses can't get up and running and we can't get started until the municipal work. So I'd like to get them both done soon. It is the will of the committee as to whether we want to forward these or not. And certainly if you have, Councilor Zondervan, if you have some questions on the municipal, we could, I hope we could get
government, it would be 90 days after this date.
90 days. So we got 3 months on the zoning before that expires, which again, we could pass it before that, which I hope we can. But it gives you a little bit of some time on the municipal side to get some things done if you feel you want to do that.
This is Nancy Glow. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councilor Zondervan, we'd be happy to meet with you if you think that would be helpful.
Councilor Zondervan, you still have the floor. I think Councilor Nolan had a follow-up to this, so do you mind?
Yeah, I'm all set. Thank you, Mr.
Councilor Nolan?
Thank you. So can we talk about timing? Just to remind us all, we had hoped to do this last August. We started it. And then the Cannabis Control Commission said they were going to do some delivery. So I understand that was last November. They finalized that. It is now May. Did I just hear that if we pass this tonight, we still have to have a separate ordinance committee meeting around our city zoning in order to allow delivery to happen?
I think, so we have two, there are two issues in front of us, right? There's the zoning and the municipal code. The zoning ordinance expires in 3 months, and we could pass that. Again, it sounds like some people had some questions. I don't know if we want to deal with the buffer zone and that kind of thing. And, we could move that out of committee today to the full city council, if we wanted to. We could move them both out, if we wanted to. But it sounds like Councilor Zondervan has some amendments and some things he wants to work on the municipal code. But I think what I had said, and I think, and Ms. Glow, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we were to let's say we move the zoning ordinance out tonight, and it gets on the agenda in a couple weeks, it follows this, pass it to a second reading, and let's say in 3 weeks' time where it's done, right? And the municipal ordinance is still lingering and still being discussed. Nobody could open, right? Because we have to do both of these things have to be passed before someone can actually go business. But I think the municipal ordinance is probably can move maybe a little faster. I mean, I don't know. I don't. My hope is that, and maybe this is for you, Councilor Zondervan, is what is what's the timeline you're anticipating? We could, again, we've done this where we've moved things forward and held the topic in committee. We have done things where we've moved things forward, and then it's not the cleanest, but we've moved things forward and then we've amended them in council. So there are a few different options. Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could speak to that briefly. The last time around when we did retail, we had a similar dilemma, and they are fairly decoupled in the sense that even if we pass the zoning tomorrow, it would still take months for businesses to go through the zoning process and get their permits and get their license before they could even come back to the city for their operating license. So even if we move the zoning forward now, the fact that we haven't updated the business permitting ordinance isn't necessarily going to delay anybody, because it's going to take a while for them to even get to the point where they would be subject to that ordinance. But I'm also not anticipating months of delay. I'm just thinking about some additional amendments that I would like to discuss with the law department before introducing them. So we could do it either way. I mean, it's really up to the committee. We can move both of them forward now, and then if there's further amendments, we can bring them in the council and refer them back to ordinance or not. We have all the options on the table that we need.
So, I mean, there's no, at some point we'll need some formal motion to do something. So, I mean, I'd be interested in how do members of the committee feel about, how you would like to proceed without any formal amendment at this point, or motion at this point, but what are people,
So, if I may, Mr. Chair, my sense is that we still have some questions. We have a question about the buffer zones, on the zoning. I have some more questions on the municipal ordinance. Again, I'm comfortable either way if we want to move it forward to the council and then resolve these questions along the way. I think we are probably 80% there. But we could also keep it in committee and resolve those questions before we pass it forward to the council.
No?
Thank you. I would move this forward. It sounds like, as Mr. Roberts indicated, the buffer zone, while many of us, myself included, would like to consider having this special permit anyway, and there's the anticipated and advertised in the ordinance is that buffer zone could be reduced. So that, and my worry is that if we keep it in committee while yes, it may take a few months before someone goes, but we are delaying that even further by another month. And part of my concern is that other towns are already moving forward with delivery. I know that right now I can order from another delivery company in another city and get it delivered to my house in Cambridge. So if we're doing this partly to help businesses start in Cambridge, we're already behind. I looked it up, last 6 months ago when we started this. I assume there's some more in the area, but I would like us to move forward as quickly as we can. So whatever the experts, either Solicitor Glauer or Mr. Roberts or Solicitor Bayer say that how to move it forward faster, that's what I would propose we do, and to move it to the committee and see what we can do. But if it's going to be faster to keep it in committee, I would do that. I just think it's already been on our docket for so long, and I know we've already had a gazillion ordinance meetings that Chair McGovern and Chair Carlone have done, and there's already several others set up. I'd like to save us all if we can.
I would point out too that unlike some of the other, the green roofs and some of the other zoning amendments, that by the time they got to council, they were really getting ready to expire, and our backs were really up against the wall to do something. This does have 3 months left, so we could move it. We could move this forward, and it doesn't mean that we have to pass it at the council at the first available opportunity if we're not ready to, right? We can hold it there for, it can sit on the table or on the calendar, and it can be brought up, while people work on it. So, it would, I would agree with Councilor Nolan that it would get it, it would get it one step further, right? But but we do, but we would have some, even once council, we would still have some time to discuss this. We're not, our backs aren't against the wall with an expiration date on this one right now. So, for what that's worth. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to point out as well that while my colleague is correct that this planning board can reduce the buffer zone even now for retail, that is at risk, and objections are raised, and the planning board could decide not to do it, and that can prevent opportunities for businesses. So I think it is an important question that we should try to resolve as much as we can. If we believe there shouldn't be a buffer zone, or that it should be much less, to try to resolve that so that businesses are not at risk of a planning board position that prevents them from opening. I'm certainly a big proponent of moving this forward, but we do have to get it right. And I'm also concerned that we haven't actually heard from any cannabis businesses in public comment. The one public commenter who was signed up is known to me as a potential cannabis business, but we haven't really heard from anyone on that. So again, that's not an argument against moving it forward, because once we put it on the council agenda, we can hear from people. But I do want to make sure that we really hear from the impacted community before we fully adopt these.
All right, the tennis match continues. Councilor Nolan.
I agree, and yet we have advertised this so often. I think people assume right now we have no possibility. It's not even written down. So I really hope we move this forward to signal to the community we are intending to allow this to happen. Right now, it's only an ordinance. We've heard from a number of people in prior meetings that they really want us to move forward, and we can always have if we move this forward, we can always bring it back into ordinance, right? So it doesn't prevent us at all from saying, oh my gosh, we in fact want no buffer zone. We will then re-advertise. But at least if we move it forward, it doesn't lose us anything, and it might gain us something. And if there's too many unknowns, fine. But it sounds like we're 80% there. We've had a number of meetings, and maybe I'm just wanting us to move it forward. So
thank you. Councilor Carlone.
I would ask that staff prepares criteria. If we're going to get rid of a buffer and possibly have 3 of these in one block, and possibly in the front of a storefront in a poorer neighborhood, I think we need criteria. And this is our first meeting on this, is it not? Or did I miss a meeting?
we've had, I forget how, I think we have had meetings on this one, but I don't recall how many.
So,
But this issue didn't come up before, so, you know.
Mr. Clerk wanted to say something.
Just going through you, Chairman Governor, just going to clarify with the council, there was a previous petition that expired. There was a petition that expired. It was on the same subject that expired, and that's what prompted the refiling by the administration. And this is the new petition. Again, I defer to the law department and to CDD, but my understanding it's substantially the same petition as what was filed earlier.
So before
we'll have a meeting at council where we're going to have a long discussion on this and criteria.
Right.
And we don't need that. That's what these meetings are for, to get it done. And I'll do what everybody else wants to do, but we've been through a few council meetings like that, and that's ridiculous. That's just very bad business as far as I'm concerned.
Zonovan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do agree with my colleague. I'm eager to move this forward, but I think it does make sense to keep it in committee for now and get some of these questions answered. I think we can get that done in less than 3 months and move forward expeditiously.
So before we tackle that, can we, Mr. Clerk, should we be voting on, should we be getting motions and voting on questions that we want the law department to address? Or I feel like we've talked about a lot of things, but I'm not sure that the law department knows exactly what we're asking for. So should we do this? Do these need to be formal motions, or can we just give them a list of things we want them to look at?
You should formally draft some language and then pass it as a policy order, as a formal question to the law department.
Okay, so for those of you who have questions for the law department and want them to look at things, I need motions.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think just in terms of using the language that's consistent with case law around zoning amendments, it would be helpful if one of the members of the committee moved to ask the law department for an opinion as to what eliminating or reducing the buffer zone would alter the fundamental character of the petition.
Okay.
Moved.
Moved by Zonovan. Roll call.
Give me 1 second. I'm just make sure I get that down. Hold on. And I'm just going to read it to make sure that I have this clearly. That the city manager being hereby is requested to instruct the law department to answer the following question regarding the cannabis delivery zoning amendment about whether eliminating or reducing the buffer zone would fundamentally alter the petition. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, alter the fundamental character of the petition.
Alter the. On that motion, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Councilor Toomey. Absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Yes. Motion passes 8 in favor, 1 absent.
Okay. Councilor Carlone, you wanted thing?
Thank you, Councilor.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just a quick point of order.
Yeah.
Mr. Spencer here in the attendees list now. Would it be possible to get him to give public comment if you would like to?
We would have to move suspension of the rules to reopen public comment. Are you moving that?
Yes, but can we check with him, see if he wants to give public comment?
Well, he just raised his hand, so I'll take that as a yes.
Okay.
All
So moved.
On a motion by Councilor Zondervan to suspension to reopen public comment, roll call.
On that motion, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. Vice Mayor Mallon. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Sorry, yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Toomey. Absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Motion in favor, 1 absent.
Mr. Clerk?
Hello, Council. Looks like I'm unmuted.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, 3 minutes.
Yeah, so I am hoping to open here in Cambridge and East Cambridge. And also, we're just actually we're just waiting to hear the results of this meeting to decide on how we're going to proceed on several other issues. However, I'd like to say that I'm concerned about the economic empowerment applicants that are in the queue, preparing to open up, me preparing to be one of them. How it would look to have to compete with other applicants and general applicants. So I'm not actually sure whether or not that is going to be considered in the current ordinance, and if that's under discussion or consideration. And I say compete, and it's fit for us to compete, but you know, it seems that the council was concerned about the health and the well-being of economic empowerment applicants and our ability to be successful in Cambridge. And a lot of us, the economic empowerment applicants have come from surrounding areas because of the holdups in other cities. And so we're hoping to make, of course, Cambridge our home. However, if the social equity program, which has a little different criteria for the makeup, it seems, from my perspective, it seems to be vastly white participants, although they use the term social equity, and the intention was for Black and brown entrepreneurs to get a foothold in the industry. It seems to have been populated by a large amount of white participants who are not Black and brown, and they are best footed to move forward using the social equity program, just because of historical reasons, right? And so those are my concerns, is that we have a whole host of economic empowerment applicants who are just preparing to get their business off the ground. And then what will end up happening is that there'll be a flood of other social equity, well-positioned, well-heeled applicants ready to come in and compete. Now, I'm just hoping that there would be some level of consideration for that change in the environment, the business environment, and I'm hoping that there would be some type of considerations for. I know it's very difficult to have race-specific criteria, but if those companies would look a little bit more like the economic empowerment applicants that are already operating, or just economic empowerment applicants in general, which tend to be Black and brown, that would be beneficial. Have them also hire 75% of their makeup, their employee makeup, be from areas of disproportionate impact, because the social equity program itself only requires that they maintain 10% or some very, very loose, low bar for employees. It would be, so if we're going to have to lose business share, please allow it to be, for those reasons, for the reasons of employing Black and brown people from disproportionate impacts, people with past convictions. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. On the motion to close public comment, roll call.
On that motion, Councilor
Govern?
Carlone.
Yes, Councilor Nolan.
Was there someone else waiting in the chat? I thought
Not-
it looked like
not-
there was some.
There was another, there's Mr. Hawkinson and Marquis Gaffey, but neither have indicated that they want to speak.
Sorry.
So to close public comment, roll call?
On that motion, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey. Absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Motion passes 8 in favor, 1 absent.
Okay. Councilor Carlone, I'll go back to you for your motion.
Yes, I would ask that if we are proposing retail districts, that some economic development guidelines, criteria be developed. I know Cambridge local first small businesses not want a group of these in one area on their street. Spread out, fine, but I just have to look at that and make it simple criteria. I think the notion that Councilor Zondervan suggested, back door or secondary entry, that's fine. But I think if we're trying to make retail work, this is a very different type of storage activity use that is not encourage people visiting a retail district. So all I'm saying is we have to make it clear that if it is in a retail district.
So we need we need to put this in some kind of motion language.
Well, I don't know what other criteria there is. That's what the planning office should develop, is what I'm getting at.
What kind of, just for my, what are you talking about when you talk about criteria, about the look of the building?
Special permit criteria, just like any other special permit, there's a criteria so that there's a standard that's met. I don't know. All I know is it will have an impact. And I think some time, and Jeff has his hand up, so maybe you'll respond and tell me I'm wrong, or that makes sense, or we'll see.
Mr. Roberts?
If I may, to the chair, if it's helpful, we maybe didn't dwell on this too much in the presentation, but there are criteria for cannabis businesses. They have been applied to cannabis retail stores over the past many months that the planning board has been reviewing these. The issue of activating frontage has really been first and foremost in the planning board's review, and I think the criteria that are there have served the board well. I will note it was pointed out, we noted on team recently that the zoning language, it was intended that the same criteria would apply, but it maybe isn't as specific as it should be, that the intent was for those existing criteria to apply. And this is just for people who are, who look at the zoning text and follow along. What I'm describing is section 11.805 in the current ordinance, which would be amended to 11.806 because there's a new being added. We can take another look at that and see if we have any other thoughts or suggestions. And certainly if the council wants to take a look at that and see if there are any suggestions for improvement, we would be happy to talk about it.
Thank you. I wasn't aware of that the same would apply. I think that's reasonable. And I will look at it, but thank you. Never mind my request.
Okay. Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think there's another question around this because for the, I'm forgetting the terminology already, but the non-wholesale delivery business would be as of right, so they would not be going in front of the planning board for any criteria.
So do you want to make a request of CDD to look at something, or?
Well, I guess the concern that's been raised is whether a delivery business could legally occupy storefront retail, and I think we all agree that they shouldn't, because it doesn't help anyone. So I guess the request is for CDD to look at how to best incorporate that into zoning, particularly for the as of right businesses where there isn't an opportunity to look at special permit criteria.
Mr. Roberts?
Thank you to the chair, and through the chair, I'll just try to quickly respond to that. So and this was a discussion that a planning board as well, when they were looking at the original version of this petition, that there's a feeling that for a cannabis courier establishment, given that it have cannabis products on site, it's not subject to the same restrictions on visual access, and basically having to completely make the interior invisible. It functions in many ways, aside from the parking spaces, which is really the key part of it. It functions in most ways just like an office would. So, typically an office use in a business district wouldn't be subject to additional requirements or a special permit or anything. So, I mean, certainly that is something we can look at, but I think the trade-off in that case is that it is putting more of an onus on those kinds of businesses to find spaces that would be, leasable for that kind of a function. So that was just something I wanted to point out. But we could look at it and look at if it's not subject to a special permit, the requirements would have to be stricter requirements, that if the space that a business is looking at doesn't meet the requirements, they would have a hard time being able to get permitted there.
And I would think, if I can jump in for a second, I mean, I would think, and thanks, Mr. Roberts, because it's made it a little more clear for me. I mean, I think what we're looking at with these businesses they would like an office, right? So you walk by an attorney's office somewhere, it's not active, there's not a lot going on. You look in the window, there are desks, there are people on phones. We allow that, right? And we don't make those folks do a lot of extra stuff. So, I mean, I don't think, I remember at the planning board meeting where they said, when we were talking about delivery in general and requiring special permits and all these things, and they said, we don't require this for delivery. Why are we going to make it? I mean, I think some of this is sort of if we think about this just as a business and it's going to be an office on, Cambridge Street, what would we require of that attorney office to do, right? Why would this be any different? Councilor Cullen?
Difference is interaction with the sidewalk and the street. People go into a pizza place.
I'm talking about like a lawyer's office. Forget the pizza place was a different,
People go into a real estate office. People go into a law office. This is not like, I don't think they're going to rent in most places. I don't see how they can possibly afford it. I even question why we're including retail districts. Councilor Zondervan is right. It's backdoor kind of use. And I have no problem with that unless it's got other conflicts that I don't even know about. But I'm thinking of active storefront. And, a lawyer's office has activity in the front room. I don't know what the activity is in this front room. This is a warehouse with people waiting to make deliveries. That's what it is. It's not an active use. The active use is leaving the building and going to a car. It's bad for retail districts. Front door, bad for retail districts.
Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I agree with my colleague, and also there's another distinction, which is that the cannabis retail stores are heavily regulated in terms of what they can display and how they can advertise. And so we do want to be careful that we're not accidentally creating some backdoor way into bypassing those regulations. So and I think we are struggling to find a balance here, because I think my colleague agrees that we want to allow it in the retail district so that we maximize the opportunity, but we don't want it to be storefront retail. under any circumstances. And so I think what we're asking the staff is to help us find a way to find that balance.
Mr. Roberts, do you understand what the question is for you and what we're asking, what folks are asking of you, or?
Yeah, to the chair. I mean, what I'm understanding is that the council is, or the ordinance committee is asking to consider additional requirements or regulations that would prevent or discourage, I guess, both cannabis courier establishments and cannabis delivery operator establishments from occupying retail storefront space. And, you know, we can look at ways to do that. And I think what I just pointed out before is that there is, and I think the council is aware now, there's a trade-off to that if the goal is to be more permissive. But we can look at requirements, but it will kind of shrink the universe of potential that could be used.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm just my own opinion. I mean, I'd be fine with getting an answer to that and getting some suggestions. I'm not saying that I agree with it necessarily, because I tend to lean more towards being more permissive than less. But if that's a question that folks want answered, I think we should get an opinion, and then we can vote. Eventually, someone will make a formal amendment and up or down. So, again, Mr. Clerk, does that need to be put in formal language?
What I have is that the city manager being hereby is requested to instruct the community development department to draft language to prohibit cannabis courier businesses and cannabis delivery businesses from occupying retail storefront space.
So let me ask, do we want to, because that's a little, I mean, that's asking, and I don't know if that's what Councilor Zondervan and Councilor Carlone are asking for, but that's asking them to draft language to prohibit, right? So I might be inclined not to support that because I'm not sure I want to prohibit it. Is there a way that we can just get some suggestions back from them and then make a decision? And again, to Councilor Zondervan's earlier point, we don't have a lot of potential businesses on this call, and I'd be, so I personally, if the motion is going to be draft language to prohibit it, then I probably won't support that because I don't know if I want to prohibit it at this point. Councilor Carlone and then Councilor Zondervan.
Suggestions is fine with me. I'm just looking for a way of dealing with something that nobody expected. And the way this industry, at least when the window was open years ago, sort of took off, kind of surprised me. And now I realize it's big business, and who knows? But a retail block, I'll be very quick, Councilor Zondervan, I know is next. A retail block is sensitive to so much, especially nowadays, that a dead storefront has impact. I see it in my own neighborhood, and it's just not the kind of use that other retail would want. And that's all. I'm asking for suggestions. I'm not saying it has to be that.
And could we say suggestions and implications so that we understand what the ramifications would be? Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would suggest instead of prohibit, maybe how to regulate, and that gives us more as to how far we want to go.
So what I currently have is for CDD to provide suggestions to regulate cannabis courier and cannabis delivery businesses in occupying retail storefront space.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could read for CDD to provide language for how to regulate.
But you want them, Councilor Zondervan, but you want them to actually come up with suggestions, though, on what it would be, right? So,
yeah, their thoughts.
Yeah, so maybe suggestions for how to regulate.
And I would like to add, and implications, because I do want to know what that means, right? I mean, I want to know what those regulations mean potentially for the businesses. So, Mr. Clerk, you're on your third pad of paper yet?
So, again, I defer to the council as it language, but to provide suggestions and implications of how to regulate.
This is a.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Clerk.
To provide suggestions and implications for how to regulate cannabis courier and cannabis delivery businesses occupying retail storefront space.
Okay, so that's the language. Discussion. Councilor Nolan, you had your hand up.
Thank you. I appreciate this discussion. Actually, it's making me think more about how it is that we're going about this. And it's frustrating we didn't have this last October when we had a meeting on a very similar petition with similar language with exactly the same thing. So I will be voting against this because I am just worried that there's no way we're even going to have this before the fall, and that will have been a year since. And I understand some of the delay was because of the Cannabis Control Commission, but since then I'm just concerned. So I just feel like we're talking about delivery businesses. There's not going to be 17,000 city. This industry will shake itself out. We have hundreds of empty storefronts across the city. I agree. I would rather have them be filled with restaurants, but right now I'd rather have something in there than nothing. So thank you.
Okay. Further discussion? Councilor Carlo?
This wasn't even on the ordinance list until recently. So we couldn't even deal with it until recently. Please understand that. It's not that Councilor McGovern and I kept it off or the clerk kept it off. It wasn't there. So it has to be on the list for us to do it. And you can ask the clerk some other time about that.
Right,
it wasn't done intentionally.
So we have a motion in front of us. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Clerk, will you please reread the order, the motion, and then we will go to a vote.
So the motion is to send the following policy order to the full city council to vote on. And the motion and the order would read that the city manager being hereby is requested to instruct the Community Development Department to provide suggestions and implications for how to regulate cannabis courier and cannabis delivery businesses occupying retail storefront space. On that motion, Councilor Carlo.
Yes.
Yes. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
No.
No. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey. Absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Yes. Motion passes 7 in favor, 1 against, and 1 absent.
All right. Councilor Zondervan, next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I don't think we need a motion on this, but as I mentioned earlier, I'll meet with the law department as well to discuss some potential amendments to the business permitting ordinance.
Okay. One issue that that came up, and I think this is what Mr. Spencer was getting at a little bit in his public comment, is that there was the question about the economic empowerment. So the state is allowed for economic empowerment and social equity applicants to a 36-month head start. Our ordinance for retail is only economic empowerment, not social equity. So there's some question of, can we do something different? But again, as was pointed out by Ms. Attorney Beyer, that this was, the state didn't have, the state was pretty broad on what city, and now they're more specific with it. So do we want a motion to get a response back from the solicitor's office on whether or not can change that? I don't know what the wording would be, but to
through you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Ms. Glover.
I think I understood from Councilor Zondervan. So through you, Mr. Chair, and to Councilor Zondervan, you can let me know if this is what he had in mind, that the committee is requesting a legal opinion about whether an exclusivity period for economic empowerment applicants would conflict with state law.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said, isn't it? Councilor Zondervan, does that get to what you were talking about?
Yes, I think it does. Doesn't quite get at the question of the social equity applicants, though. So I guess maybe that's implied, but that further question is whether we could provide an additional exclusivity for economic empowerment applicants only, so separate from social equity applicants.
Okay, so we can add that in, Solicitor Glover.
Could you repeat that, Councilor Zondervan? Thank you.
I think it's just adding the word only.
Yeah, I think it is implied in what the solicitor said, but I just wanted to make sure that was clear that we were.
So I think what we were saying is not only do we want to look at the 36 months, but we want to look at the state has economic empowerment and social, and we want to look at, can we do just economic empowerment? So how much leeway do we have to with that, with that role, basically? So
if I could, Mr. Chair, then it would, if I got it right, requesting a legal opinion about whether an exclusivity period only for economic empowerment applicants would conflict with state law.
That works. All right, roll call.
On that motion, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey. Absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Motion passes 9 in favor. 8 in favor, 1 absent.
Okay. So if there are no other motions for requests from CDD or the Law Department, we are left with this question about both the municipal ordinance and the zoning ordinance and what to do with them. So I think the Councilor Zondervan made a motion to hold the municipal ordinance in committee. Is that what you wanted to do, Councilor?
Yes, Mr. Chair, but I believe we don't need a motion for that.
You do not need a motion for that.
You not need a motion for that. Okay, so on the zoning, Councilor, you had mentioned earlier that you wanted to.
Yes, I want to move it to the council. So moved.
Favorably, unfavorably, or no recommendation?
Favorably.
So, Councilor, so what we would be doing, the municipal ordinance will stay. We don't need a motion on that. Councilor Nolan has that the zoning ordinance move to the city council with a favorable recommendation. And again, I would point out that that even if we did that, we still have 3 months left before it expires. So it does give us some time to deal with some of these issues at the council level, should we choose to do that.
And point of information.
Yeah, Councilor Nolan.
And if it gets forwarded favorably and we get some language back, we'll still amend it in council, correct?
Correct. Is there any discussion on Councilor Nolan's motion?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I just want to make sure I understand the motion. It's to refer the zoning petition to the full city council with a favorable recommendation.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Is there any? Okay. Roll call.
On that motion, Councilor Carlone.
Present.
Present. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey. Absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Motion passes 7 in favor, 1 present, 1 absent.
All right. Anything else? On a motion to adjourn by my co-chair, Councilor Carlone.
On that motion, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. Vice.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey. Absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui?
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern?
Yes.
Motion passes 8 in favor, 1 absent.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, CDD department. Good night.
Good night.
Right.